Thanks
JB,
for
do you want to kick it off, or I can?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks for joining, everyone. And today's the second day of the SSJS bootcamp. So if you have attended the first session, we just started with the introduction and the basic functions. And today we're going to look at the HTTP functions, date and time functions, and utility functions associated with some brief demo. And the next day of each session, that is on Thursday, we are going to have a hands-on session where one of you will get an opportunity to build while the speaker will guide through the steps. So if you want to participate in that sessions, I mean, like be a builder, let us know in the chat. Also, we have the Slack channel created. If you are already part of the mclearningcamp.slack.com, I have created the Slack channel that is SSJS Bootcamp and Challenges. So some of you have already submitted the challenge, like whatever we have shown in the first session, you can try to replicate that in your org and show that, or create your own use case and try to use those functions and implement that and show us the code. So we're going to look at all the submissions, and maybe at the end, end of the 10 sessions, we will pick the winner for a swag, or if possible, if I get the certification vouchers, we should be able to share that. I'm not committing to anything because I don't have anything on hand. If I get, I would really like to share with you. So participate in this channel challenge. All you have to do is follow the session, try to implement it, and then share it on the Slack channel. If you have any questions on the Slack channel, post them in the chat. And any questions related to this session, post them in the chat as well. Tim will answer at the end of the session. And as always, this will be recorded and it will be uploaded to the MC Learning Camp YouTube channel. With that, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, JB. So like JB mentioned, we've got a couple of sessions coming up with some experts to cover some more advanced functionality. Like she said, for this session and next week's session, we're going to go through somewhat of the basics. A little bit more advanced, doing an API call from a cloud page. So getting right into some really cool use cases there. But happy to pass it off to Sabui, Tony, and Ivan to cover some more advanced functionality there. So look forward to those sessions. And then like JB said, starting tomorrow, we're going to be diving right into the use case we're going through today, and building that cloud page, building that API functionality, going through what we were walking through today, having Mohammed start us off with building out all those essentials and getting into that SSJS coding. So like she said, if you're interested, Mohammed's going to be our builder for tomorrow. Thank you, Mohammed. But we are looking for builders for all future sessions. So please share in the chat if you're interested. Okay. So today we are going to be covering, like we mentioned, those core functions that primarily focusing on the HTTP functionality. Along with that, we'll come with some of the more core utility functions to build out this scenario. So we're going to break this down into two different areas. First is the setup to do the actual coding itself. We're going to be using the use case of this cool journey functionality, this wait until event functionality that requires an SSJS API call from either a script or a cloud page. We're going to be walking through the the core basics of API calls using a tool called Postman. So you have an understanding of what the core code is to enable that before we actually code that in SSJS. And then leveraging AMP script to enable our SSJS in the cloud page itself. And then in the build, we're going to be following some keys that we set up in AMP script so that we can have a secure cloud page, because we're going to be exposing some key security data points from our installed package. And then we're going to be doing part one of the two parts for an API call. We're going to be doing an auth call to generate a token from a cloud page using SSJS, covering some of those key functionalities, so HTTP, stringify, parse, get value now, and covering some of the more object-related functionality. All right, so let's talk about our use case. So Cervelo Bank launched this amazing lead nurture journey. We're very excited about it. It's a journey that feeds emails to a variety of different types of leads. And in between each email, there's a 7-day wait step. So what the problem is that they're encountering is that when a lead receives this email and they're ready to talk to sales, the out-of-the-box functionality in Journey Builder prevents a real-time engagement to move them along in the journey so it goes to sales. And so that's where we wanted to pull in this wait until event functionality. And the challenge with that functionality, you can't just drop that into the Journey canvas. You need to, in order to enable that, you need to have an SSJS API call to come directly into that activity to move that person along in the journey. So we're going to jump into the platform, just give you an example of this in a little bit more detail. So if we could take a look at the journey, let me just zoom in a little bit here, a little bit zoomed out. So here's an example of that journey. So we've got a journey that is sending leads down a couple of different paths. We have a hot path, which is going to create a task in the Salesforce CRM environment and then send a salesperson an email saying, hey, you've got a lead who's ready to talk. We've got two other paths. We have a warm path and then a cold path here that are being fed different emails. So say that warm lead receives an email. So here's an example of what that email would look like. Say, it provides all these sales information, and you've got this call to action here that says, hey, are you ready to talk to sales? So say that warm lead clicks on this email and they're ready to talk to sales. They want to talk to sales right away. Well, unfortunately, in the journey, in order to capture all of that engagement, the standard functionality would use a wait by duration step. And that would capture everybody, someone who clicked within the first hour of that email, all the way up to the 7th day, and then would only move them along after that 7-day period. So that is sort of like a challenge with the basic functionality within Journey Builder. Now, there is a workaround you can do where you could have multiple of these sort of wait by durations where you're checking, after 60 minutes, did someone click on this email? If they did, move them up to the path that would be contacted sales. Then you could say, okay, a day later, and then 6 days later, but it's not really scalable and not something that would allow for consistency if you're creating a lot of journeys. So a year ago, or sorts, Salesforce Marketing Cloud came up with this amazing functionality, this wait until event functionality. And all you do is drag that into the canvas and drop it in, and you don't need this wait step. And what you can do is you can set this up that it'll move along someone who engages immediately, but an API call needs to come to trigger that wait until event. So that's what we're going to build today. So this is sort of that point where your typical journey builder, your typical marketer might need to reach out to a developer and to use this SSJS functionality. But we're going to break it down and start from the basics. So you too, even if you're a not developer, could understand the basic functionality of what that SSJS call needs to do. So in order to set this up, we're going to create a couple of different components to prove this out today. So I've got a journey that's set up here, and it's basically just has a wait until event functionality in here. So we're sending an email address, and we've got someone sitting in this wait until event. So what we're going to do is we want to send an API call to this wait until event to trigger to them to move along this path. So this is one part we're going to use today to fire into this wait until event. And we've got this set up. Let me just quickly show you the configuration for this wait until event, because these are some of the data points we're going to need to provide in order to enable this via the SSJS coding. So the most important part is this API event. So whenever you create a wait until event, you either create a new API, an entry event within Journey Builder, or you can leverage an existing one. And this is the key that we're going to be using in our coding. The next thing that you're going to need to create is a data extension. So here's an example of a data extension that this wait until event is tied to. So that API call is not only going to trigger that wait until event, it's also going to provide data to this data extension. So you'll see the subscriber key, you might see the journey ID populated. That's going to be in the payload of that API call via the SSJS script. And then one other data point that might be helpful whenever you're setting up this wait until event functionality that you're going to want to provide in your payload as well is the journey ID. So for every journey, there is an ID in the URL. It's between the 23 and the slash. And you'll typically want to add that to your wait until event functionality so that if you have multiple journeys that are using this wait until event functionality, you want to make sure that the person moves along in the correct journey itself. So there's another data point that we're going to be using in our coding in SSJS. Most importantly, we're going to want a cloud page. So here is the cloud page that we've built. It's basically a thank you page that we've built that is going to be where we're going to be building our SSJS in a little bit. So we've got AMP script code set up here for some keys we're going to be walking through that we're going to be leveraging. And then we've got an empty canvas here where we're going to be coding the auth call to send that first part of the API call in SSJS coding. Okay, so before we dive into, one more component that we need in order to make this work is we need the actual email itself. So this email has a call to action button, and this email is going to use the redirect to AMP script function to this cloud page, this number 3081, and that should coordinate to this cloud page as well. So here's that page ID 3081. So when we need to test this out to prove out the API call, we're going to want to click that call to action button and receive from that email, and that should send them to this cloud page. This cloud page in turn will send an API back to the journey to move them along in the journey using the SSJS functionality. Okay, so let me just shrink my screen here a little bit so I can see it. Now the first part before we start diving into the code, we wanted to walk through Postman. To give an example of what an API call does, we want to give you a reference point of the basics of API calls. So if some of you may be familiar with Postman, it's a great tool that you can use to validate your setup. And for any one of these API tools, you're going to basically want to create a collection. So I've got this SSJS Bootcamp collection. And in this collection, I've got two requests. I've got an auth request, which is going to create the token for us. And then I've got a post request, which is going to send the payload to fire this wait until event functionality and is going to populate that data extension for data. So, we could move right into the SSJS step and just do the coding, but having you see the functionality work end to end in Postman is very valuable just to make sure that your installed package, your connection's working, everything in that end. And we're going to be leveraging and comparing when we're doing our SSJS coding back to Postman just to make sure it aligns, because we're basically just recreating this functionality in SSJS on that cloud page. So one of the things that I just want to walk through how this works in Postman. Let's talk about this first call. Now this is an auth call. Basically an auth call on any API is the handshake. So you're reaching out from your environment. So in this case, this Postman app is reaching out to Marketing Cloud and saying, I need to create an opening that I can either pull or pass data between the two environments. Now, in order to do that, you need to have a couple of key items. You need to have a client ID, you need to have a client secret, and you need this URL that's associated with that auth call. Now, the documentation that's associated with that is provided by Salesforce. So this is in the back of the deck. This is basically instructions on how to do an auth call into Marketing Cloud. And it's got some basic requirements, this grant type, this client ID and secret. And then it specifies in that URL the specifics of what you need to provide. So you need to provide your subdomain from your installed package, and you need to add this v2/token to the end of it in order to make that happen, that auth call. And here's an example of the payload. So where do you get this, the client ID and the secret and this subdomain? So in setup, you should either create or leverage an existing install package. So we won't go into details of how to create an install package in this session. We can go through that in a little bit more detail in the hands-on session, but let's just click into the install package that we're using today. So here are those components that you're going to need to make those two different calls in either Postman or in SSJS. So here's that client ID, which is this combination of numbers and letters here, client secret. Here's the auth-based URI or URL, and here's the REST-based URL. So those are the 4 points that you're going to need to make that API call. So if we go back into Postman, what we've done is taken that domain that came from our install package. We've added that v2/token to the end of it that's going to be designated for this auth call. In the payload, just like they've provided here, we've got the grant type, client ID, and client secret. So in Postman, literally copy that in here and set this to the basic setting. It is a JSON object in the body. So let's click send on this. And what this should do is generate a token. And if it's successful, when you generate a token, it means the connection's been made, which is a good sign. So here's this token, and just for this purpose, we're going to copy this token. We're going to use this in our next call, which is our REST call as well. So once that's done and you've been able to successfully make a token, you can move on to the next request, which is the post request, which you're going to send a request to the data that you're going to want to provide into the Marketing Cloud environment. So Marketing Cloud also provides, Salesforce also provides a variety of different API REST or post requests. So in this example, this is for a fire the event journey example. Each one of them are different. They require different types of syntax. So for this example, for the URL string, it's going to be that subdomain that's from the install package. And then at the end of that, you're going to want to use this syntax interaction /v1/events. And then even the payload is specific. You want to follow this exact payload using contact key, event definition key, and the payload specifications itself. So when we go into Postman, let me just go in here and we're going to copy in this token that I just copied. And we'll go back into the body and we're going to hit send. And hopefully that should be successful. We should see, so this is basic confirmation that that went through. So again, we've pulled in our domain from our install package. We've added the correct URL endpoints there. We've followed the syntax in our payload, and we should have a successful, which we're showing here, a successful pass that we should have passed this subscriber key, this journey ID, and more importantly, in the journey itself that we tested, that subscriber should now be moved on from that wait until event, moved on to that journey. So if we go back into the journey itself, let's just refresh this journey. We're going to go back to the version that is running, and we should hopefully see that subscriber moved on to the next phase of that journey. So let me just refresh this, and let's take a look and see what happened. And there they go. They moved from this wait until event, and that's validation that this functionality is working, that your core code is working within Postman. It's just always good to validate the connection's working, the functionality is working before you go into a cloud page, because if those who've experienced on cloud pages, the error reporting is not exactly, the most detailed as it could be, but this is very helpful to validate, okay, I know the connection's working, I know the syntax is correct, so now I just need to replicate this in server-side JavaScript on the cloud page itself. One thing I just want to also call out is that we should also see this data point come through as well from Postman. If we go into that log that's set up, we should see that record come through. Okay, so this was created, again, this is Salesforce time, it's 10:22, it's really 12:22 East Coast time. Here's that journey ID, and here's that subscriber key. So that is the functionality end to end. And now we want to go and build this in the cloud page to do this exact same thing, but using server-side JavaScript to do that. Okay, so let's go into the cloud page and let's click into that page. And again, we've got this set up where we've got an open canvas where we're going to be referencing and filling out our code. So as you can see in this code block, we started off with the script for AMP scripts. We're designated this as an AMP script block. And then we've got down here, we're designated this for server-side JavaScript. So let's start off with the function that we're going to be doing today. We're going to be using the HTTP function. Now, to do that, there's some amazing documentation in Salesforce. And today we're going to be covering a variety of functions, both the core function up above here, and then also platform functions as well. So I've got this pulled up to the post function. So there are a couple of key fields here. The first field is the URL, or that unique URL, that auth URL that we saw in Postman is what we want to replicate in this field. This is that content type header from the documentation, which we can provide. And then this is the payload. This is the information that we want to pass onto the into the data extension and to trigger that event. So here's an example of that code example. So we're just going to copy this this code, and then let's go drop this into our cloud page, and we're going to create this from scratch. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a request one, kind of like that syntax. And now we're going to start off with the first variable. How do we create? We need to provide for our API call, for this auth call, the URL itself. Now, one of the things that we've got up here are some keys and some data that we've brought in via AMP scripts. And one of those things that we've brought in is this variable, this auth URI. So we're populating this variable. We're setting it as a variable up here in AMP script. So now we need to just basically convert this variable into the URI or URL here in server-side JavaScript. So to do that, let's go into the function. It's a platform function, and we need to convert a AMP script variable using a get value function. So this basically converts a variable from AMP script over into server-side JavaScript. So we'll just take this syntax by itself. We're going to drop this into our cloud page, and let's we're going to want to let's name this the initial URL, because we still need to tailor this URL, and we want to pull a specific value. So up here is that auth base URI. So let's copy that value, and we're going to paste this in here. And there we go. There's that variable. This init URL is this auth URL domain. Now we're not done there. We need to also add in that syntax. So we're going to call this is going to be the final variable for the auth URL. Now this variable is going to be the combination of this URL that we just brought in. And then we have to add in that syntax that they had specified in the documentation, this /v2 token. So let's copy in that syntax. And we're going to use that comparison operator that we used in the intro to add these two variables together to create our URL. So that's going to take the URL, the auth URL, and it's going to append this v2/token to the end of it. I just want to make sure we have a slash ending there. Just want to make sure that that's part of there. And there it is. That's the first value that we need to provide in our post string. So there we go. That's that first part. Nicely done. The next part is this content type. So let's just copy this variable. We're going to set this variable. And this is very straightforward, set based on the instructions that's provided by Salesforce as well. So this content type is application JSON. So we're just going to copy that. We're going to paste that in, surround it by single quotes. And whenever you're coding in SSJS, you always want to make sure that each one of those lines, for the most part, ends with a semicolon. Okay, so that's our second variable. Luckily, for an auth call, we only need 3 variables. For the post call, we'll be enabling those other 2, but all we have to worry about now is our payload. So let's just create a little bit of space here. Now we're going to be leveraging the payload as an object, like we had discussed in our intro session last week. This is going to be an object which is going to be a variety of different variables. Again, this is the payload. It's going to include all the different variables. So let's go into the documentation. And just like it was in Postman, we're just going to copy this syntax for that payload. And we're going to paste this into our SSJS code. We're just going to clean this up a little bit. So these two fields, the scope and the account ID, those aren't required, so we can remove those. I kind of like to have the grant type at the end. And then just want to clean this up to make it workable in SSJS, which means we just need to remove some of these double quotes here. Okay. And then we're going to remove that comma there. We'll clean that up a little bit. So now we've got the basic structure for payload. Now we need to determine the client ID and the client secret. So this is where we're going to want to use that key functionality, the encrypt and the decrypt functionality that we're using in AmpScript. Now we're not going to go into incredible detail on this, but I wanted to walk through some of the basic functionality of how to set up keys in using AmpScript. So we've set up this content block, which is going to give us those keys. So what we've got here is a client ID and client secret that we've pulled from our install package. And in AmpScript, what we're going to do is we're going to encrypt that data using this encrypt symmetric function, where we're going to encrypt that client ID variable using the 3 different keys that are available in Salesforce. Now, these are all pre-set up. So we're going to encrypt that data, and then we're also going to decrypt it so that you can see when we do this as a preview and resend, you can see the original value, you can see it as an encrypted value, and then you can see it decrypted. So let's just preview that, and you can see that functionality. Let me just move this up a bit so I can preview this. And we'll do a preview and test. So here's an example of the client ID. Here's the original client ID. Here's the encrypted value. Now, this is the value that we're going to drop into our cloud pages so that we never have to list these, this secure data point, this client ID, or the secret. We're going to be using this value in our cloud pages because, as you know, if you're using in Postman, it's okay to expose, these client IDs because you're using that on your personal laptop or in your environment. But a cloud page is open for anyone to look at. So you definitely want to make sure that you're not putting out these specific data points that allow people to connect into your environment. So that's why we want to decrypt both the client ID and the client secret. And then this example will show you when we convert it back on the SSJS side, when it uses the decrypted value, this will be the value that ended up the actual client ID and the client secret. So they'll allow us to make that call in the cloud page itself. So let's go back into our environment, and so now we're going to want to use for the client secret and the client ID, we've got these variables set up here, these 2 variables, but we need to follow that same steps to take those variables and convert them over to variables that are useful in SSJS. So right above our payload, what we're going to want to do is convert over the decrypted value for the client ID. So let's put in client ID. And this variable is the decrypted client ID variable. And we're going to paste that in here. And then we're just going to make a copy of this so that we can set the variable for the secret. So we'll call this client secret. And then let's just grab that variable. And then we'll paste that in here. Okay. So now all we need to do is take, now that we've got these variables set, we can just paste this in here. We don't need those to be in quotes. And then we're going to copy in the secret. Oh. Okay, great. So there is our payload. We've now determined the payload is equal to those 3 required values, the client ID and secret as they've been decrypted, and those client credentials. Now, one other thing that we need to do for that payload, in order for it to be sent and to be viewed in that call, we need to stringify it. So we need to convert it into, I guess, that JSON format. So we're going to be leveraging another function called stringify. It's a core function. So let me just navigate up to that section. Again, this is in that core documentation, and it's under the utilities functions, and that's under the string utility functions. We want to find the stringify syntax, which basically just stringifies the value so that it could be accepted in the auth call. So all we're going to do is just add this stringify here to that payload so it can be accepted. Okay, so now that we've got that, that should be our syntax. And so now we have a response that we want to now need to convert. So we should be able to make that connection. We should be able to pass that data for that authorization. And now we need to pull out that token so that we can use the token in the next step. Like we saw in the Postman, that long string of variables. So to do that, we need to parse our response using another function. Now this is a platform function to parse the JSON. So under the platform functions, under the under the utility function, we're going to use the parse JSON functionality. And again, this is going to take that string and allow it to be readable in SSJS. So we're going to copy that syntax. We're going to delete that variable. And so we're going to be taking that data, parsing it back so that we can output the token. Now, to be able to get to that variable, it's going to be based on the response that comes through that required one, and it's the response is the response itself, and sort of it's an array like we covered in the earlier session. It's the first part of that response is where that token sits. So we want to output that and parse that in JSON. And that should allow us to create a token, which is going to be the RES1. And if we take a look in the documentation, it shows you what the typical response will be. So in this example, we just want this token. We don't need the rest of this information. So we're going to use the access token, variable that's part of this payload that's coming through, which is the response. So if we go back into the cloud pages and we type in access token, that should be a variable that should output that token. So let's go in here and we're going to basically just write out that token. And that should be it. So let's hit save so we can save all of the work that we've done. Let's schedule and publish this. And there we're seeing a token. So that might not be an actual token itself, but that is a good sign. That token is very similar to the token that we saw as far as syntax goes on the Postman side. So very similar, it begins with EY. So it's looking good so far. But to validate it, let's go into the email that I received from that actual email test send. And let's go into here. This is the email that I received. If we click on this call to action, it should take us to that cloud page. And the only thing I think I forgot to do is I don't think I published. So let me just publish that. Sorry about that. And let's try that again. We should see that token get populated. in the cloud page. There it is. There's that token. So that's part one. That's the most important part. We just took a cloud page, and we have now, this cloud page is now connected to our marketing cloud environment. That's the big step. In our next session, we're going to do a REST call that we're going to follow the syntax that we had for in Postman, and we're going to create add to our SSJS section where we're going to set the REST URI following that same logic that we did for the auth, where we're going to add a different type of syntax at the end of it, and then we're going to create a different payload based on the syntax that's provided in this documentation. And then we're going to use another HTTP function call and follow the specific steps for each one of those so that we can pass that data, and we'll be able to move that person along in the journey, not through Postman, but through the cloud page itself. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I know we covered a lot of different ground on that standpoint, but wanted to open it up for questions, see if anyone had any specific questions about wait until event, about Postman, about keys, about SSJS, any questions along those lines?
Thanks, Tim. That was very insightful. I'm checking for any questions in the chat. I don't see any questions as of now, Tim.
No problem. So, I mean, this is complex functionality, and I think this is a theme that JB had started, I think, with the AmpScript Bootcamp. This is simple, right? If you follow the steps and you understand the steps, the core functionality is all you really need to know. And it can make things that are kind of complicated, like an API call, somewhat simple. You could find this code if you did a Stack Exchange and you're looking for an auth call. You can find this syntax. You could drop this into your cloud page. There might be some sort of looping, like a try catch that you might find that you might, not know exactly how to take that out or put that in. But if you spend the time to understand the documentation, utilize a tool like an API tool, utilize other resources where you can validate your code, validate your syntax, so you're not relying on SSJS. So like for an example, say I didn't, add a colon there. That might create an error, may not, but let's just see. This cloud pages can be very temperamental, so that worked. But if your syntax isn't absolutely correct, the cloud pages errors are not going to be like, I think if we did like something like this token, let's try that just to see if we get an error. Yeah, see, no token appeared there, all because you used a capital T in a token. So when you're pasting in some of this code, if you're not following all the steps, if you have a comma in the wrong place, or you're not using the right syntax, the cloud pages aren't going to tell you, where your error is. So it's always helpful to use as many resources as you can before you come into the cloud pages to get that out of the way. Like, okay, I know my install package is working. I know via Postman that I can enable this functionality. So you can sort of cross that off the list that, if something's not working, if I'm not being able to generate a token, it's not about the install package. It's not about that syntax. What else could it be? So it's always recommended, because of the challenges with cloud pages, to make sure that you're trying to minimize as many of those open and those potential areas of where those errors could be, just because of limitations in cloud pages. All right, well, if there aren't any questions, let me just go back to this deck and we'll just do a quick wrap up. Okay, so in this deck, we've got it broken down, all of those, the components that we built, the cloud pages, we talk about the install package, Here's some screen captures from Postman, for example. Here's a little bit of breakdown of those keys, breaking down some of that information. The example of how we're going to be utilizing AMP script with SSJS, and then a specific breakdown of how we did the auth call setup, going right through that entire code, right through the response and how that was all generated. And then we've got some great resource guides, both the server-side JavaScript documentation, that's that first link, these two links down below on the API documentation. We've got a good walkthrough that we've created on our hands-on SFMC site on how to create those keys. Here's the link for Postman if you don't have it. Here's an amazing article from Zuzana Jarzinka, who goes through this wait until event functionality, both the auth and the post. If you want to work ahead and see how she's done the post, I think she has a try catch in her use case that's a little bit more complicated, but a good walkthrough of that functionality as well. And hopefully that was a good walkthrough of both the setup, the unique characteristics of this use case, how to replicate that in Postman, and then how to build that in SSJS. That's it. That's all I have on my end.
That is wonderful, Tim. Thanks for the informative session. I know this is something for a beginner. This is something a bit difficult to grasp on the first time. So we will be sharing the recording soon. So you can go through the recording one more time and then try to replicate that in your MC org and post that in the Slack group, in the challenge group that we have. And I saw one question, Tim, about the functions that we can use for a particular use case. So whenever we are implementing something, how do we know which function to use?
A great question. So I think it's dependent, and I think that's why we walk through this by taking the use case and then breaking down the functions, right? So in our example, we had a variable that's where we start. We had a variable from AMP script, and we needed to convert that over into SSJS. So that's where we used the get value function. We needed to, based on the documentation that we've learned, in order to pass the payload, we needed to stringify it. So that's where that function is, both the core function and then the platform function. So I think it's a mixture of getting familiar with the core functions. Again, like JB said, we're going to be covering the core functions throughout this bootcamp, but also understand, on your individual use cases, what are those functions that you need in the code that, it's not like you need to know, I need to know all of these libraries of what the functions are in SSJS. Base it on your use case. What do you need your code to do? And then go and find, hey, is there a function for that? And utilize it and learn it from that standpoint.
Oh, I see one more question. What is the use of the token generated?
Great question. So that token is, once in our next session, we're going to be using that token to that's a required value for the post call to send the value, send our data points to trigger that API event and to populate that data extension. So in the Postman example, when you set up your payload, you also have to do in the authorization step, you have to paste in that token. So what this call does is says, okay, I've got a token that came from my auth call, and in order for me to verify that I gain entrance and to populate my data, here's that token, Marketing Cloud, that you provided to me on my other call. So then Marketing Cloud's like, okay, here's your token. It's like you're passed. You're good. You don't have to auth in. You can come on in, and now you can post in your data. So it's sort of like a secret passcode to let you back into their environment so that you can go into wherever you're going to that API event and to that data extension to populate the data.
And to add to that, this is mandatory to talk to the MC via API. So it also includes creation of the installed package in the Marketing Cloud. And when we create the installed package, we will get the token. I'm trying to find the session that we have done before. I will add that to this recording. So that gives a detailed overview of how we can create the package, installed package in the MC org, and then get those details.
Yep, very helpful. We'll walk through the install package in our hands-on session as well. We'll create one from scratch.
That's wonderful. Is the key and secret added in the email and then encrypted to make the API call. So you demonstrated the email example, right, Tim? So I think the question is whether the key and the secret added in the email to make the API call.
Okay, so yeah, that might have been a little confusing. So what we did build in Content Builder in Email Studio is a way for you to create the encrypted data points. You're basically using AMP script, and we did this in Content Builder just because it's an easy way to sort of see those values. So what we did, and this is not an actual email that gets sent itself. What's basically purpose is to create these two encrypted values that we're going to list in Cloud Pages. So for instance, this encrypt data value JXZ56Y, if we go to our Cloud page, here it is. Here's that value that we can now freely list on our Cloud page. So if somebody does an inspect on this Cloud page, they'll find this value, but it means nothing to them, right? You can't authenticate into our environment because it's encrypted. So we used Email Studio as an easy way with AMP script to create this value, which you could store, in some sort of your documentation. That's definitely recommended, but wanted to show you how that's created. And that's something we could also cover in our hands-on session, is how to utilize the keys to create these values. It's definitely easier to do that in AMP script, and we used Email Studio as a vehicle for that. So I apologize for that confusion. It was a little bit of I know I went through a lot there, but great question.
I don't see any other questions.
Awesome. All right, we're going to be doing a deep dive, and Mohammed, thank you again for tomorrow. We're excited. We're going to be creating all these components and get as far as we can. So again, this might stretch over a couple of different hands-on sessions until we get this finally done, but we're going to be building the journey. We're going to be building the email. We're going to be building the Cloud page. We're going to be building an installed package. We're going to, if you want to get up and running in Postman, we're going to be doing all of those things before we even do the SSJS part of it. So please join those sessions and sign up for future ones if you want hands-on building in our platform.
And Tim, I see one other question, and I think understanding that is also important to progress in learning SSJS. So the question is, can you explain again why you provided 0 after response, 0 in square brackets after response, while defining
yes
result 1 variable on a Cloud page?
Great question. So like we covered in our last session, the response is an array of variables or values that comes back on that response. And so what you want to do is you want to parse out that response, finding that first variable. So if you take a look at your typical response, it's got the access token. So the first variable is this access token, right? And so like we had covered in our last session, that's how arrays work, is they don't start at 1, the first value before the comma, they start at 0. So when you're getting your response, I mean, a lot of this stuff is kind of cool to have. Like you could pull out the REST URL. That's kind of handy to know that that's there. But this is really all you want. And so what that's doing is identifying, I want this value to be converted to a JSON value so that I can associate it with the token. A developer might help answer that a little bit better as well. I mean, again, I'm more of a functional role. I'll have to admit I'm still, learning the nuances, but you might want to save that question also for, like Ivan would be a great person to ask that in more specifics. But I believe that's the case because it's an array. You want to choose that first set of fields. That's what we want to convert, and that's what we want to use as the token.
Thanks, Tim. I think that is all for today. I don't see any more questions.
Awesome.
Thanks for
Thank you, everybody.
An amazing session. So see you tomorrow. I have shared the link to register for the next session and all the other sessions as well. So this is the link for the user group. So whatever events that I create will be published here. So if you join the group, then you will see the join button on the top of the page. So if you join the group, then you will get automated notifications whenever a new event is published. So see you tomorrow. Take care and have a good one. Bye.